Hello, everyone. Um, Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Angela Rounceville, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of English. We are thrilled to be hosting author Geoffrey Cohen and a panel of students in another great ASU Common Read event. The goal of a Common Read program is to encourage first-year students to write about pressing social problems that are relevant to ASU's mission as a public enterprise. By learning to write about such problems as a community, we increase the probability of finding solutions to them. This year, we are writing about bridging divides. This ASU Common Read event is hosted by writing programs in the Department of English with support from the Humanities Division of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at ASU. And so now my pleasure to introduce Geoffrey Cohen, our distinguished guest this afternoon. Geoffrey Cohen is a professor of psychology and the James G. March Professor of Organizational Studies in Education and Business at Stanford University. His research examines processes that shape people's sense of belonging and self and implications for social problems. He studies the big and small threats to belonging and self-integrity that people encounter in school, work, and healthcare settings, and strategies to create more inclusive spaces for people from all walks of life. Leading our discussion today with Dr. Cohen is Vanessa Sullivan. Vanessa Sullivan is a fourth-year doctoral student in English education at Arizona State University. She is an assistant director of writing programs, the Department of English Marvin Fisher Scholar for the 2024-2025 school year, and the current president of the Arizona English Teachers Association. Her research focuses on writing teacher education, critical writing pedagogies, and community literacy, and she is thrilled to engage in discussion about the ways that belonging connects to writing, research, and education. All right, and off we go.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rounceville, and thank you everyone for being here today. We're thrilled to see you all. Dr. Geoffrey Cohen, it's such a pleasure to talk with you today. Thank you for being here with us.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming to this event. I'm just delighted to be here and to have this conversation with you, Vanessa.
Thank you. As you know, we have students around our campus and beyond who are reading and engaging in various ways with your text this year. And I would love to start off if you could tell me just a little bit about why do you write generally? And then what led you really specifically to write this book at this moment in time?
It's such a good question. I was thinking about that question. I'd always wanted to be a writer. That was actually my first aspiration, and I do feel as though writing at its most fundamentals is about connecting across the gulf of the gulf that separates minds and hearts. And there's nothing I feel like reading a good novel or a piece of literature to find out that, oh, right, C.S. Lewis put it about literature, there's people out there like me too. And I feel that literature goes right to the heart, and writing goes right to the heart about what it means to connect authentically. And I always felt like the best writing tries to do that. And that's what I try to do in my writing. And in this book, I really felt like it was also, the topic is about this very fundamental need we have as human beings, as social species, not to be alone. It's one of the most toxic states for a human being to be in, is to feel chronically alone, to feel disconnected from humanity. And I think that you probably know this better than I do, but and your students as well, that writing is a way for us to connect across the gulfs that separate us. And it can be a very powerful way to do it, because you just feel and experience another person's point of view in a way that I think it's very hard to do through other mediums.
I love what you say about that. I love what you say about the connection of writing and the opportunities and potential that exist. We talk so much to our students about that in writing programs. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about we know there's so much opportunity in writing, so much potential, so much opportunity for connection, but it also can be really hard. It can be isolating. It can be something uh, we do alone and get really stuck in the process. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about, when writing this book, were there challenges that you encountered, and how did you work through them? And then how did you kind of build that resilience as an author to create this incredible book?
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for the question. I don't necessarily have a good answer. I think you just keep going. And I have always found it helpful to hear other writers that I admire talk about how difficult it is and how much self-doubt they feel, and how awful they feel like their first drafts are. I really do love that book by Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird, which is all about writing. And her top suggestion is to write crappy first drafts. You just kind of have to get it out there on the page and bypass that internal critic, because I think the biggest block to expressing ourselves in writing and maybe elsewhere is our own withering self-criticism. I mean, at least I'll speak for myself. I do experience that, and so I think what's important, what the two things that have helped me, one is just kind of separating the generative phase from the evaluative phase, just getting stuff out there on the page and in crappy first drafts, as Anne Lamott would say, and then you have something to mold and to work with and decide what to keep and what not to keep. I think that's really key. Just not being too hard on yourself, especially in those early phases, and knowing that actually self-doubt, not being satisfied, is a good sign. It's a sign that you have a vision and there's a gap between what you're producing and that vision. And that dissonance is a sign that you have taste. And taste is one of the truest virtues, I feel like, as a writer or any artist. And then the second thing that I found very helpful was to imagine an audience. I would sort of stare at a blank screen on my computer, and that really wasn't helpful. I wrote a lot of my first drafts imagining a person that I wanted to talk to. And for me, it was my children, and what I would want to say about what I've been studying and what this research that a lot of my colleagues have been doing over the years. What would I want to say? Say if I was on my deathbed, what would I want to communicate? And so I kind of had a person in mind, had people in mind, not some abstract other. And I would often write a lot, initial first drafts, just on my phone, just almost like a text, just to kind of get it out there. Just, kind of forces you to make your point in a pithy way. And then and I found that to be really helpful. And I think just knowing that this is kind of normal. It's kind of, you have to kind of, as David Goggins would put it, you have to build up scar tissue on your mind to be a writer. It kind of takes time, and you have to kind of hang in there.
Thank you. That Anne Lamott text is one of our favorites in writing programs. We use it a lot, and I think it's so great to hear what you're talking about, how even a renowned author, it can be hard, and you have to, I love what you say about audience, thinking about who is that for, who are you writing for? I think that's great advice. So switching a little bit to the content of the book, a major thread throughout the book is this use of wise interventions through what you call situation crafting. And so, as you know, the audience for this event currently is in large part first-year college students. What types of wise interventions might their specific generation be, what might be specifically useful to them as far as wise interventions?
Yeah, I asked my daughter, who's a college student now, a similar question, and I think first, just take a step back. What is a wise intervention? I actually don't like this term. I don't like the term wise intervention, but it's used in my discipline. But just to kind of give just to kind of pull the camera back a bit. What I think a lot of the science has shown over the years is that what shapes us far more than we really realize are the situations that we're in, the concrete here and now, like what we're doing, who we're with, how we are kind of interpreting it. And so the situations, not so much who we are, but where we are, shapes us in ways that we don't fully appreciate. And just to take one quick example, one of my colleagues did a great little study looking at who cooperates versus who defects or tries to cheat in a strategic game. I'm simplifying it, And he asked, well, is it people with a reputation as being really selfish or really giving who cheat versus cooperate? And that didn't really matter at all. What mattered was the situation that he created for them. And for one group, he called the game the community game. And there, 70% of people were nice and cooperated. For another group, he just changed the name of the game and called it the Wall Street game. Now, all of a sudden, my identity is staked on looking out for number one. And he found in that case, 70% of people defected or tried to grab the pot of money for themselves. And that's just an example of how the situations we're in, down to how they're framed for us, down to the name of the game, down to how people are kind of interacting or treating with us, shapes us much, much more than we realize. And that's the lesson of social psychology, and I would say social science, the power of the situations that we're in. Now, wise intervention is all about how we can craft situations for ourselves and others to make them better. And there's a suite of them that have been discovered in social psychology, but also by role models and success stories of successful teachers that we really admire, coaches who are just masterful at creating situations that bring out people's best. And so what wise intervention, a wise intervention, just as wise this term means, is like, I'm just kind of wise to how people are experiencing the situation. It's perhaps different from woke. I'm just kind of trying to understand how you're experiencing the situation might be different from how I'm experiencing the situation. And what can I do to make the situation a little bit better for you and for me? And one of the wise interventions that has come out as really, really powerful is what's known as values affirmations. Values affirmations. And these are little interventions that we can do on ourselves, or we can do with other people, in which we focus people on what they care most about. What are your values? What's the most important thing to you? What do you live for? What would you die for? And we have, there's many ways to do this. One way is to give people like little writing activities where they reflect on their day's activities and try to integrate them into their most important value, or they just ask, like, what are my most important values? And then why do I care about them? And what we've found, and a lot of people have found through a lot of studies, is that this gives people a lot of resilience in the face of adversity. It helps people to sort of feel, hey, I'm bigger than the adversity in front of them, in front of myself. It helps them to stay focused on what really matters to them, especially in situations where social pressures might lead them to do something regrettable. And it has these benefits for health and well-being and openness. So I would say that's like one I think I really believe in, is this sort of values affirmations. It's not just a practice, it's a principle. Whenever you're entering a situation, especially a difficult one, say you have a disagreement with a roommate, or you're talking about a political topic, or you're about to take a big test, these sort of challenging, threatening situations, it's very helpful to take a step back and remind yourself of your larger purpose, what really matters. And what that does is it makes the situations in front of you, the adversities in front of you, feel a little less dire and a little more manageable. And sometimes they can have a really positive effect in the long term. So values affirmations, visiting and revisiting what's core to you and strengthening your core.
Thank you. I love that. I think that's a lot of food for thought for myself, for our students as well. And I'll come back to asking you about affirmations in just a little bit here. My next question, I wonder if you could tell us, so you wrote about the somewhat endemic condition of belonging uncertainty. And I'm wondering, what do you see happening in our society right now that makes people feel susceptible to not belonging?
Well, that's the one thing that comes out of a lot of the science, and I think we've all experienced it. I've for sure experienced it, is belonging is really fragile. I mean, we think, and you could feel like, hey, I belong here. I'm pretty good. I feel pretty good. But, I feel like I belong in academia, but it's very easy to have that sense of belonging pulled out from under you. And one of my favorite examples, I mean, I'm actually feeling this right now, to be a little personal. I'm away from my family. I'm in Berlin. I'm all by myself. And I feel this, great belonging uncertainty. And it's a reminder to me of what it feels like. I mean, I know I'm a white male and I don't deal with a lot of the kinds of exclusions that a lot of people face more systemically, but I do find these situations like I'm in now to be really helpful about what it means to feel like an outsider. And that experience of what Greg Walton and I call belonging uncertainty can be really powerful. And it comes from a number of different places. a sense of belonging and certainty, but it is something that we all experience as human beings. Belonging is a fundamental need. We really do have this need to connect. We're kind of wired. The term belong means to go with, and we're wired to go through this world together. We really do need people, and it's even sort of hooked into us at the level of our DNA, just because as a species, we're highly vulnerable to predation. We're very out there in the wild, just very edible. And so we do, like we've evolved and down to our DNA to really be attuned to whether or not we're part of a larger tribe. And when we feel like we're not, when we have that uncertainty about whether we belong, it leads to this sort of cascade of biological and psychological effects that can be really toxic, ranging from sort of vigilance and sensitivity to rejection, feeling exposed, feeling ashamed, taking things, little adversities looming large. And so I would just say that one aspect of being human is that belonging is really fundamental need, but it is really fragile. One of my favorite examples of this is some work by Kip Williams, where he looks at people just playing this game of what he calls cyberball. Long story short, you're just you're playing catch with other people in a computer game that you don't even know. And halfway through the game, the other players, who are actually sort of pre-programmed entities, they're not really players, but you don't know that, they stop passing you the ball. So it's with these people you don't even know. And what's the effect of that? And he finds that the effect of that, to put it in a word, as he puts it in a word, is pain. And when you put people in a scanner and have them go through an fMRI scanner and go through that experience, the regions associated with physical pain are activated, suggesting that when we feel disconnected, when we feel like we don't belong, it actually is kind of comparable to physical pain. I also think it's comparable to hunger. We start to sort of crave connection. I think this just makes us, we are susceptible. We need situations to support our sense of belonging in our day-to-day lives. And we can do a lot as institutions, as cultures, as friends, as teachers, to support one another's belonging in our day-to-day lives. Even as huge forces, social forces, undercut the belonging of many people, including people from marginalized groups, but many others. We live in this era of kind of cultural reckoning area where we're facing just the effects of systems of exclusion and how they've just disadvantaged certain groups for a long time. And so we live in societies where there are so many powerful forces dividing us, also a media that just feeds off of fear and outrage, that creates political polarization, xenophobia, political authoritarian leaders. All of this is like a very powerful, does a lot of damage to our sense of connection, our ability to feel connected to one another in our culture. But nevertheless, down on the ground, day in, day out, there's a lot we can do to create belonging in spite of these sort of larger forces that divide us.
Thank you. And building off of that, I mean, I think you touched on this a lot, but what is it? What do we do that to go beyond sort of one-off interventions, to introduce more systemic or cultural change within our institutions to create belonging?
Yeah. Well, there's so much social policy that we need, of course, to create more inclusive settings where people from diverse groups are represented, especially in positions of leadership. So social policy, I would say, is number one, is really vital to create cultural transformation and cracking down on bias and discrimination, all these subtle and not so subtle ways in which we other people. But I would say also, in addition to good intentions, we have to be really sort of smart about it. And one of the lessons of social science is that it's not enough just to have good intentions. It's not enough, for instance, to say we want to create a more inclusive set of practices for hiring or for diversifying our company or for diversifying our school. There are all these little ways in which our minds can play tricks on us that can undercut our intentions. And just to kind of give one example of this way in which cultural change is hard because of the way our minds work, and that we have to be sort of smart about overcoming these biases. In one study we conducted, we found that when making a decision about whom to hire for the job of police chief, what people would do would be to redefine the criteria of merit for the job of police chief to fit whatever credentials the male applicant, not the female applicant, happened to have. So if the male applicant happened to have a lot of people skills and was really family oriented, the people making the hiring decision would think, oh, you know what's really important to the job of police chief? It's being people oriented, and it's being people oriented. It's being concerned about others. That's what's really key. But when this woman presented with the same exact credentials, they didn't adjust their criteria at all. So people sort of engage in this sort of subtle bias to which creates this illusion that they picked the right man for the job, when in fact they're sort of defining the job to fit the credentials of the man. And one simple solution, once you know that that's the way our minds work, is to create a little intervention. And that's what we did, where we simply had people pre-commit in advance to what criteria are important to this job of police chief. So they couldn't kind of retrofit it to fit whatever candidate they wanted. And we found that eliminated gender discrimination, so that people were just as likely to hire the male as a female candidate. And I think that having not only, I always feel this way, that virtue is sort of one part motivation, like we have to have the motivation to create more inclusive spaces, but we also need good strategy. So hope is not a strategy. We need good strategies that are wise to the ways in which our biases can take us off track and make us fall short of our common commitments to community. I don't know if that,
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit? So, you just gave this answer thinking about some of these systemic things ways we can approach belonging. And I'm wondering, switching a little bit towards writing and rhetoric, where a lot of our students are engaging, how can students in their writing create belonging in its within their writing and its various sort of shifting and multimodal forms? And specifically, how do we communicate effectively with those we may disagree with without exacerbating this sense of us versus them that you talk about in the book?
One answer to your question is to violate one of the injunctions of Strunk and White in the Elements of Style. I remember reading this, that he said, or they said, that whenever you're giving your point of view, cut out "I think" or "I believe," because that's implied. And so in some research with Michael Schwabe, a postdoc at Stanford, one of the things that we found is very effective in written communication, especially across lines of difference, is just kind of creating a subjective opening by saying, hey, this is my point of view. This is what I think. Just preceding your opinion. It's like a little wise intervention with two words, I think. That has two effects. One is that it makes the other side a little bit more open to your point of view, because they feel like, oh, there's some room here. I'm not being coerced into a point of view. You're just expressing your perspective. And then the second effect it has is on the speaker themselves or on the writer themselves, so that when we're kind of writing in this way, that where we're acknowledging our positionality, let's say, or subjectivity, then we actually become a little more intellectually humble. And we found in some research that when people are kind of led to have conversations in ways in which they acknowledge their own subjectivity, they use a lot of terms like "I think," and they also ask questions of people with whom they disagree, then there's this suite of effects that follow, ranging from people expressing more humility about their political beliefs, and also being less likely to villainize the other side, think that the other side is demonic, which is a huge problem in our highly polarized environment. And then people actually also become less polarized over time. They don't become more extreme versions of themselves and strengthen in their opinions over time when they don't have enough evidence. So I think this sort of practice of communicating in a way that acknowledges our positionality, acknowledges that, hey, I am one perceiver of this vast reality among many, it has so many effects that I think it's, we're just looking at one way to do it, which is by saying "I think" and acknowledging your subjectivity. But I'd be curious, there's probably so many other ways to do that, to both treasure our own point of view, but also to acknowledge it when we're communicating, especially across lines of difference.
I think that's so important for our students to hear, because there are these rules that exist in writing. And I think part of working within these rhetorical situations and really complex moments that we're in requires us to know when do we break those rules. And I love what you say about that.
Yeah, that's really well put. I think that's true. Knowing when to break these rules and knowing that I mean, I do feel like one of the challenges of our era is that the challenge of humility, understanding that each of us has a subjective point of view. And one of the things that causes a lot of mischief in our interpersonal relationships, our relationships with friends and across party lines is what Lee Ross, a social psychologist, called the objectivity illusion. This belief that I see reality as it is, unfiltered. And we all do it. We all think, hey, I'm just seeing reality as it is. But our minds play tricks on us. I saw this on a bumper sticker. Don't believe everything you think because your mind plays tricks on you. And going back to that study I mentioned with gender discrimination, one of the things that we find time and again is that the people who are the most biased are the people who believe that they are the least biased. So in that study, the people said, I'm totally unbiased. They engage in the most gender discrimination. And we have some other studies that showed the people who don't think that they're susceptible to bias or that their political group is susceptible to bias, they're the most susceptible to misinformation as well. So I think having a healthy attitude of humility, a healthy skepticism, critical relationship to your own mind is really key. And then, of course, expressing that in the way that we interact with each other so we can kind of model that humility. I think that we can do that in writing as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. You touched a bit on the political divide, and my next question leads right into that, which is we are weeks away from a major presidential election, and many students online with us right now will be voting for the first time. How do you advise these students to engage in the political process without becoming jaded?
Yeah. I mean, I do not know the answer to this question. But I think that one thing I think going into my own personal experience is that you never know. You never know. I feel as though, you try to make a change in a person and it doesn't seem to work, and then you create another change and it's like, oh, I didn't even intend that, or the person changes not right now, but much later. And so I think maybe one of the things to kind of keep us in the race here, keep us in the race, keep us on course is patience in addition. So humility is one virtue and patience is another. I remember this as a college student. I had a college student. He was let's put it this way. He had a very different political viewpoint from me. He would say these very, I found, offensive things. And he was coming from his own culture, his own background, and he was a very homophobic guy. And we would get into these arguments late into the night, and we'd get no work done. We'd put down our work and start debating for like 5 hours, and there would be this group of people like just watching us debate. And I felt like I am making no progress here. He's just digging in his heels, and we're getting nowhere. And I would just leave feeling I was like totally ineffective. Then, years later, I bumped into him again, and a strange thing happened to him. This guy, his name was Hank, he joined a fraternity, and unknowing, somehow he didn't know this, but the fraternity had a lot of gay people in it. And as a result of being in this fraternity, he started to just hear stories of their experience, which made him empathize. And that goes to like one of a lot of research suggests the power of stories, like conveying not facts and information as much, especially in discussions across lines of disagreement, telling your story of harm. And these were people that he came in contact with, and they were his brothers, and he heard their experience, and that kind of opened his heart. And then, as a result of his heart being open, all of a sudden he started repeating the arguments that I had made to him years earlier. And he told me, he's like, yeah, I thought of you many times. And he even got into fights with people who were homophobic and became a kind of advocate himself. And I guess I don't know what that story says. And I'm kind of a sucker for those kinds of stories, is that change is possible. Change is possible. My mom says, people don't change. I do feel like change is possible. People do change. They just don't change necessarily, first of all, in the direction you want, but also in the time frame you want. And a lot of times our acts are kind of like stones thrown into a pond, the ripples of which we often just never see, never know. and that's both for good and for ill. But I think a lot of times one of the things that keeps me going is just that belief, and it comes from the research too, that small things that you thought had no effect actually were quite meaningful and had sometimes these time release effects that you may never know about. And that's part of the poetry of life.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. We think a lot about that a lot with teaching, right? You just don't know what impact you can have. And thinking about our students and the acts they're doing, you just don't know how you may impact someone's day or their year or their life.
You just don't know. I mean, there's all this work now by Liz Dunn and Nick Epley showing the power of these like little things, right? Just making eye contact as you're walking down the street makes the other person feel like there's more meaning to life. Approaching your barista with the attitude that, hey, this is an opportunity to make a connection rather than just a financial exchange leads to a better and more connecting interaction for both of you, and you both leave a little bit happier. There's all these like little pockets of opportunity that I think passes by all the time, and I think there's so many opportunities for connection in the most unexpected of places, and I think one of the other aspects of poetry here is just there's many missed opportunities, and a lot of the research that we do, for example, showing that when a teacher just simply says, "Hey, I'm giving you this criticism." We do this study with David Yeager and others. "Hey, I'm just giving you this critical feedback because one, I have high standards, and two, I believe in your potential to reach them." But all of a sudden, students, especially students of color, who may be kind of dealing with low expectations, they sort of open up to the feedback, and they're much more likely to incorporate it. And as a result of that one sentence given by their teacher in middle school, we find that years and years later, they're more likely to make it to college. That one sentence creates an opportunity. And that tells us two things. One is that, yeah, right time, right place, right person, a little thing can make a big difference. But also it tells us that, well, you must be missing a lot of opportunities to make that kind of difference. They must be passing us by all the time, especially when we may have, because of our cultural programming, low expectations for the people that we're with.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I have one more question for you, and then we're going to switch. We have 5 incredible undergraduate students who are going to be asking you questions. So the final question that I have for you is looping back to this idea of affirmations. And you talk about affirmations throughout the book as an important touch point. And I would like to ask you about the affirmations that guide your work as a scholar, a professor. I know you're a father, you talk about in the book, as a writer. What values guide the way that you personally approach the world?
That's such a great question. I don't know. I feel like there's many, but the 3 I would point out, one is just curiosity. I feel like curiosity makes you a good researcher. It kind of makes you realize there's a lot more going on than I understand. And that has really helped me as a scientist, but also it's given me, I'd like to think that it's given me empathy. I'm really curious, like what motivated this person to act that way? I really want to understand. And so from curiosity comes empathy. Another one is respect. Respect. That's the sort of one word. The slang that every generation seems to use, like respect. And I was kind of curious. I love etymology, so I look up the origin of words, and I was a little floored to discover that respect, that word actually means to look again, to respectate. And so that value has embedded in it a sort of strategy that just when you think you have someone figured out, look again, ask a question, find out a little bit more. That's a big value of mine, respect, even for people with whom I might initially not feel so positive about. And in fact, in my life, I found that some of my closest friends are kind of like that, people with who I might have otherwise, had I not have that respect, sort of blown off or not wanted to be around, but instead I was trying to be sort of comfortable being uncomfortable and getting to know them a little better. So respect. And the third, this is going to seem a little weird coming from a scientist, but faith. And I don't mean religious faith. I mean a kind of optimism, what James Baldwin would call, he called it optimism. He's like, I'm an optimist because this is not an academic matter to me. I'm out there in the world. I have to believe. I have to have hope. Because hope and faith create. And you're not going to create anything if you don't believe. And I just love that idea of faith being a belief in the dignity and potential of another human being. That's kind of how I define it. And I think we get way too caught up on these ideas, especially in academia, about being accurate. Like, what is this person really like? I don't think so. I think you got to see not just who the person is, but who they could become. And I feel like the best teachers I've had believed more in me than what I thought I had to give, right? And they see you, not just you, but what you could become. And that's faith. That's faith. Faith creates. And just to give like an empirical science-based example of that, one of my favorite studies by these two people, Rosenthal and Jacobson, just to make a long story short, what they did is they went to an elementary school and they told some of the teachers, hey, this handful of kids, 5 or 6 or 7 of them, hey, we've tested them, and guess what? They're going to be bloomers, intellectual bloomers. And what that means is that someday, some way, over the course of the year, they're going to bloom intellectually. We've tested them for this. Unbeknownst to the teachers, those kids were just randomly selected. They didn't really test them. Then they looked at the effects of those kids being earmarked in that way, and they found that those kids who had been identified as bloomers, they had higher IQ scores at the end of the year than the kids who had not been so identified. That's an example of how just believing, having that belief, having that value as a teacher that I believe in you creates changes the nature of your reality and change to those kids. And they found in that study, by the way, that the biggest effects were for Mexican immigrants. And the idea here was that saying that, believing or having that belief was especially impactful for those students who had not been believed in. And I do feel like that's one of the elements of wise intervention here that is addressed by this faith, is that this idea of faith is that oftentimes we're going to be surprised if you have that faith. The people who are most undervalued are often the most underestimated. So I think I would say those 3: curiosity, respect, and faith.
Thank you for sharing those. So it has been such a pleasure for me to talk to you, but the real stars of our show are our students who are here to ask you questions. And so it's my pleasure to introduce, like I said, we have 5 of them. The first student who I'm going to introduce is Daniela. Daniela, are you here?
Yes, I am here.
Thank you. You can go ahead and turn your camera on and ask your question.
Can you see me?
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Please.
Okay. Good afternoon, Dr. Cohen. My name is Daniela Putukang. My question for you is, considering the amount of clubs on campus attempting to foster belonging, college students, especially at ASU, still feel alone somehow. So how can individuals form transformative relationships on the daily?
It's such a great question. Thank you, Danielle, for asking that. I think there's many paths. There's many pathways, and the bottom line, I think, is hanging in there and putting yourself out there. If there are those opportunities and there are those resources, and ranging from joining clubs to maybe joining a lab or finding a mentor, it's important to be, I think what you would say is socially assertive and challenge seeking, kind of going out there and knocking on a few doors and putting yourself out there. And I do feel as though, I know that sounds almost like a platitude, but it's easier said than done. And one of the things that can be really helpful here is to know that it's very normal to feel, especially during the transition to college, that it's very normal to feel like, hey, I don't really know how I fit in here, or where I fit in, or which club to join, or where to find a mentor. That experience of being uncertain about where and whether I belong, it's very, very, very normal. And I know I've been in situations myself throughout the years where that is just so reassuring, just to know that uncertainty about belonging is something normal and that can be overcome with good strategy and with good effort. And the reason why that's important is that when we feel like we don't belong, when we feel uncertain about whether we belong, we're a lot less likely to put ourselves out there and challenge ourselves. And so, just to give an example, in some research with Greg Walton and others, we've done these studies just showing that if you have first year students just hear stories from senior students about how when they first arrived at college, they didn't feel like they belonged, but then they kind of realized at the time that they did, and they found clubs that they belonged in and people, they found their niche with time, that just hearing those stories gave people, helped to lessen their sense of belonging and uncertainty, and made them much more socially assertive, much more likely to knock on doors and find a relationship with a mentor. And a lot of times these mentoring relationships lasted for years and years beyond graduation. So I would say that, it's about putting yourself out there and understanding that we all feel awkward about doing that sometimes, and it's really an iterative process. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Daniela. Our next student is Gloria. Gloria, are you here?
Yes.
You can go ahead and turn your camera on and ask your question.
Hi, everybody. Hello, Dr. Cohen. My name is Gloria Studio Moreno. I'm a future educator, and my question to you is, what strategies can educators of color employ to facilitate conversations about collaboration in support of students from diverse backgrounds, particularly in environments where ethnic differences may create barriers, especially when working with more experienced, predominantly white colleagues? I also, I do want to point out, I loved reading that part of the collaboration with students. It was amazing. But yeah.
You love reading which part?
The collaboration with students.
Yeah. It's such a great question. I want to present myself as really knowing the answer, but there are kind of little points of because I think all of you could probably investigate these questions as not as scientific and practical questions, because there's not really great answers out there.
I just asked it, but
yes,
I'm just funny right now.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think I would use your question as an opportunity to underscore the importance of what Nick Epley calls perspective getting, and that is just a term that refers to good listening and asking good questions and listening to the answers. And I feel like we don't do enough of that. Having kids who've gone through the education system, I feel like a lot of the difficulties that they experience, especially in middle school and in high school, could have been averted by the administration if they just took some time to ask their students questions about, hey, what barriers are you experiencing? How are things going for you here? What's it like? And how can we support you better? So that's what I would. I know it sounds simple, but the research suggests we don't take the time to ask people about what their point of view is, and we don't take the time to ask people, what are your barriers? And if you could wave a magic wand, what would change about your situation that would make your situation here at the school more one like where you feel like you belong? So the motto might be that, I think, like, if you don't belong, I want to know about it. And asking questions. So just to give an example of that power of the approach, real brief, great little study by Carol Iyengar, two economists. Again, long story short, they were really interested in helping first generation college students. These are students who were the first in their families to attend college, get more out of their college experience. And oftentimes they underperform relative to continuing generation students. So what did they do? They didn't just come in with an intervention off the shelf and deliver it to the students hoping that it would help them. Instead, what they did was to interview the first gen students and say, hey, we want to make this college experience better for you. What do you want? What do you need? And the first gen students said, you know what we want? What we want is more contact with faculty. We just want to kind of have more connection. And number two, we want more tips on how to get better, how to do better. That was it. And then based off that perspective getting, they implemented this intervention, which was just 2 emails from their instructors. And their instructors for these big introductory courses basically reached out, made contact. They said in the email, hey, here are my office hours. If you want to come, I'd love to see you, kind of creating that opportunity for connection. And then if the student got a B or less, the instructor would offer little strategies for how to do better. Like, you might go to this extra tutoring session, or come see me and I can offer some help in this particular domain. And that was it. And they found these whopping effects for first-gen students, such that those who just got those 2 emails did much better in the course academically. And so I love that example, and it's one answer to your question, the power of perspective getting. As one activist, Black activist, once put it in an essay, listening, a good way to hear.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Gloria, for the great question. Our next student is Zev. Zev, you can go ahead and turn your camera on and ask your question.
For the question. I mean, that's kind of the era that we live in is, you know, belonging is such a super important need, but we all have our, you know, we live in a world of wide-ranging sensitivities. What makes you belong might make me feel threatened. I gave a talk in Denmark, and there they were dealing with Muslim immigrants going to their preschools, and at the preschools they would serve pork as for lunch. But this was something that really, you know, having only pork as an option was really a threat to belonging to the Muslim children because they can't eat it. And there was this big controversy that erupted because for the Danish people, it was like, no, pork, that's part of our tradition. This is part of what makes us part of our culture, but it was threatening to this other culture. So I don't know what you do with that, but it's something that you resolve through conversation and talking and creating situations that are inclusive for everyone, like offering more options for lunch. So I think that's just kind of one of the things that we're all kind of grappling with in this era. And then I would say also in answer to your question that the dark side of belonging, one of the things that I've gotten really interested in is this idea that people can find belonging in pretty dark places. And so one of the dangers of a lonely society like ours, there's a kind of epidemic, some say an epidemic of loneliness. You know, about 11% of people have no friend that they can turn to. A lot of people feel lonely, about 25%. One of the problems with that kind of society of disconnection is that people become really vulnerable to groups, including extremist groups that offer them belonging. And when you look at people who join extremists or terrorist groups, a lot of times they join not because they subscribe to the ideology initially, but rather they join because they finally feel like someone who matters. There's a story of C.P. Ellis, a Ku Klux Klan wizard who got out, but he describes his experience as a economically disadvantaged white guy and being included in the Ku Klux Klan. And he felt like when he was kneeling there before the altar with the cross, he says, I just felt like someone. This nobody, I finally felt like someone. And that's one of the dark sides of belonging that I really feel like we have to be mindful of as a society. This is why it's almost like a life and death issue. We need to figure out how to create a society where all people feel a kind of basic safety net, a basic sense of connection, so that they're not vulnerable to the ideological predation of these groups that know that they can lure people in with this promise of belonging. You know, we all need a port on the shore. And so the dark side of belonging is that we go to the wrong port. And that's why I think it's very important for colleges and institutions and all of us as friends to people with whom we might disagree with, is that we need to be there. We need to kind of offer what developmental psychologists call a secure base. And that gives people the strength and the security to think for themselves and to challenge themselves intellectually.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Zev, for the great question. Our next student is Madhav. Madhav, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, Dr. Cohen. My name is Madhav Pavitran. I actually participate in Model UN conferences a lot, in which we are kind of asked to represent a country and provide their cultural perspectives and attempt to embody their ideal. So in these conferences, I'm required to learn about a culture and people in a short period of time and dialogue around their diplomatic and political positioning, which may or may not be different from mine. Sometimes it feels like forced belonging, So what might be some of the positives or negatives of this type of participation?
I don't know. That's really interesting. What do you think? I mean, I don't want to turn it back on you so abruptly, but can you tell me what you think is some of the down positive and negatives, and maybe I could kind of comment. But I think it's such a fascinating question. I appreciate it.
Well, it's kind of difficult for me to say because like technically I'm from India, so I came to America like for my education and I'm a sophomore student now. So like usually when I go in these conferences, I don't really have a say in which country I represent. So I represent like a bunch of countries like Russia, China, UK, France, and things like that, and like a whole bunch of different kind of global perspectives when we talk about war and everything like that. So sometimes I'm representing Russia in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is like a bit of a it's a ditzy situation because like although I sympathize with the people of Ukraine, if I'm looking at just from an Indian perspective, I also sympathize with the people of Russia because I understand where they're coming from. So when I'm trying to like then I have to kind of put myself in that position where I have nothing to do with it, but I still have to kind of force belonging and put forward my ideals or to kind of embody the thing of like dissent or my anger towards the situation, which I'm kind of confused about.
That is so interesting. I love that question. I don't really have a good answer for it, but I would ask, is it a good empathic stretch, do you think, to kind of put yourself into these roles where you're kind of seeing things from a point of view that you kind of don't agree with? And I don't know if I'm picking up on what you're talking about. You might feel a little kind of uncomfortable with that because you're perhaps expressing views you don't agree with and find yourself looking at a diplomatic issue through a lens that doesn't quite feel comfortable to you. Do I have that right, or am I missing something?
Yeah, that's pretty much it because like they're different diplomatic positions. So although like I'm kind of neutral in the situation because I understand that there's like grievances on both sides, so I have to be diplomatic about it. So I can't let my emotions get into it, especially in the conference if I want to win.
Yeah.
So it's mainly more about like projecting my kind of ideal. So like I go into research and I try to pick up on Russian culture. Maybe before the conference, I'll listen to some Russian music or something like that. Maybe get my hype up. So like it's just kind of different. Plus, like I've represented like a bunch of countries, like Latin American countries. So I know how to speak Spanish and French and things like that. So I don't know. I just try and do things, but it's really kind of sometimes you have to force it because sometimes I'm China and I don't really agree with what China does, especially being an Indian. And when I'm talking about issues that concern Chinese and Indian kind of where they clash, it kind of affects me because I'm also the son of a soldier. And being from that kind of army background where my dad was in the military and I've had firsthand experience about these kind of issues, it is kind of uncomfortable at points, but you kind of have to push through because it's kind of like a job.
That's so, yeah, I really appreciate your sharing your experience, and it makes me wonder about. I mean, what you're doing is so impressive, and but maybe it does carry some potential liabilities too about I'm just kind of thinking aloud here, but I don't think we do enough of. I'll put myself out there. I don't think we do enough of the kinds of things you're doing through. Uh, through Model UN, which is really try to empathize. And though you may disagree with another person's attitude or position or another country's actions or policies, I think it's an invaluable exercise to try to understand how one could construe the world in a way that renders that attitude or that action sensible. And Tom Kuhn talked about this in History of Science that you really to understand why people believe such crazy things in the past. He was talking about science. Is that you really just want to ask yourself not about the crazy thing that they believe, but what was the worldview that they had that made that crazy thing not so crazy? And that's their context, the cultural context and the historical context. And so it sounds like one of the really amazing things that Model UN would give you is that ability appreciate the context and the kind of subjective. It's all about the subjective situation that a culture or a country or society and maybe other people in your life. I don't know if this generalizes to other people in your life, that how, it kind of makes you a little more open to the possibility that, yeah, there might be some way of seeing things that makes them a bit reasonable. Now, you may decide, I don't want to go there. I ultimately disagree, though I can understand how you might feel that way. That's not a world that I subscribe to or want to support. But at the very least, you'll be a bit more nuanced and respectful and a little more likely to understand, I think. And I feel as though that's one of the things we really lack in this era. We really lack. We are way too quick to judge and way too slow to see the nuances and the diversity of perspective on complex issues. And at least to have that humility that I don't have the whole story here. I just have one point of view based off of what I happen to read. And I guess that would be another thing, another sort of take home from our conversation here is that is one of the things that is the most important, I think, to have in this era is an ability to empathize and to think in a scholarly way about complex issues. And that doesn't mean you have to give your opinions. You can still have very strong opinions and beliefs, but they are grounded in an understanding that the world is not so simple. The world is not so simple, and people, reasonable people, can disagree. And I think that's, I think we always want to stand up to injustice and oppression, of course, but there is real value today, especially in this era of social media and performative advocacy. There are so many pressures out there seeking to divide us and to simplify our understanding of the so-called other side. So I don't know, I'm kind of building off a little of what you said. I really appreciate the question.
Yeah, thank you so much for your response.
Thank you for the great question and conversation. We have one more student question for you, and I know we're right at 3. Do you mind if we go a few minutes over? Just 2 or 3 minutes over? Okay. Liam, you are going to wrap us up with your final question. Go ahead and turn on your camera.
Hello. Hey, Dr. Cohen. My name is Liam Miller, and I would like to know what advice you have for me and my fellow students who are beginning our college and career journeys.
That's so good. Well, one is have a purpose. I feel as though, I'll tell you about a little study. One of my students did this. I thought it was very interesting. You might find it interesting. He did this little study where he brought first-year college students in, and he asked them what they wanted most out of their life, out of their career, out of their college experience. And a lot of them, when you just ask them, they would put things like, yeah, I want a great job, I want a good solid career, and a secure, I want to sort of secure my credentials in college. And they wrote other things, but it was sort of by and large about burnishing your resume. And burnishing one's resume. And then for another group, what he did was to give them a little mental exercise. And he did this. He said, what I want you to do now is imagine yourself at the end of your life, and take a moment to imagine yourself at the end of your life, looking back at your whole life. Think about, what would you be most proud of? What would you remember as the sweetest experiences that you had? And he found that when people did this, it was like a 180 shift, and people started to really identify purposes that they didn't acknowledge under the normal hustle and bustle of everyday life. They said, what I really care about is cultivating my relationships, deepening them, and I care about finding things that I intrinsically enjoy to do. That feeling I get where I'm doing something and I'm harmonizing with it and it feels good and I feel like I'm making a difference for other people, especially, that came up a lot. That's what I want. And he found that shift, pulling back, it's a little like values affirmations, but you're kind of getting a little distance, because I think as human beings, we're often kind of forgetful creatures. We get sort of caught up in the status race. And of course, there's a lot of stressors that make us do it. But taking a few moments to reflect on our core values and taking a step back, a wide angle lens on your life to think about what is it that grounds me? What is it that I'm committed to what is it that I will feel at the end of my life I am most proud of? Taking the time to kind of really do that in your writing, in your day planning of your days activities and your long-term objectives. I think that's just invaluable, because it's easy to forget, and we can forget over and over again, and then we can find ourselves like that Talking Head song, someplace we really can't explain how we got there. And so that lodestar, that North Star, really kind of trying to identify it, being open to what it is and trying to find it. It's our unending life process, but asking the question, at least there's no substitute.
Okay.
Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for that.
Thank you for the great question, and what a great spot to end. Thank you so much, Geoffrey Cohen. It has been such a pleasure having you with us today. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I'd like to extend our very special thank you to the ASU Humanities Dean, who also is named Geoffrey Cohen, as well as English Chair Nush Powell, for their support. I'd like to thank Kristen LaRue, Bruce Matsunaga, and Ashley Sorensen for their help organizing this event. We also want to thank Brian Echeverria with Macmillan, who is essential to the success of these events. And finally, we want to thank our absolutely incredible ASU writing teachers who work tirelessly to help ASU students imagine a brighter future, and to the students who write and work alongside us every day. Dr. Geoffrey Cohen, thank you again so much for being here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. That was such a wonderful conversation.